Good afternoon. It's 1:02, so I would like to start. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Pavlos Protopappas. I am the Scientific Program Director for the Institute of Applied Computational Science. This seminar series is part of the Institute. As you may know or may not, the Institute is multidisciplinary and the focus is computation. So most of the talks we have are variety of topics, and the focus is usually computation. And for example, this semester we have talks that start with how to save the world from diseases, to financial systems, to biology, to the universe. Every semester we have big variety of talks. So as you know, this is the best seminar series at Harvard because we have nice food, and that's the number one. Not that the speakers are not amazing. The speakers are amazing too. Next week we're going to have, just to remind you, Chris Rykov is a professor of applied math here. This week it's a pleasure to introduce Mauricio. Mauricio used to be one of the lecturers here at the Applied Math. I got to know him 3 years ago. We have so-called computational challenge. We do that every January. Students compete with each other. And so happened that Mauricio and I were team leaders for 2 different teams. And we didn't know each other at the time, but the thing became so intense that we have to have Ross intervene our dispute between the, you remember that, right? Yes, okay. So Mauricio started undergrad in Mexico, and then his PhD in Texas, Austin. He moved a little bit north from Mexico, and then he moved to Harvard. And now he's a faculty at the Children's Hospital and Medical School. And today he's talking about big data, epidemiology, and how to save the world. Thank you. Okay, Mauricio.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank Pavlos and Daniel for inviting me to talk about some of my research. This will be very informal, and as the audience is broad, some people like Avi, he teaches applied math. We co-teach a course in physical mathematics. Some people may be disappointed because I will not be showing partial differential equations or sophisticated formulas, but nevertheless, I hope the talk will be entertaining, and since your belly is full, so you're in a better mood already. Also, I want to emphasize, and I think, it's in the 3rd slide. So this work wouldn't have been possible, that whatever I'm going to be talking about, if my collaborators were not involved. There's some people here from the School of Engineering, some students in the audience, Andre and Clifton, and some already who took high-paying jobs already. So this is a good selling point for big data, right, nowadays. Disclaimer, I'm not an epidemiologist, and my research in the past has been in scientific computing, and I still do some of that in terms of solving partial differential equations in very complicated systems to simulate floods and to simulate the global composition, the chemical composition of the atmosphere at the global scale. However, today, I'll be talking to you about big data, as many people who will be in this series. So this is a slide to sort of get you in the, to appreciate what you already know, right? So we have a lot of data around. And so there's a great interest in pursuing predictive analysis to say, what's going to happen in multiple fields. And can we do that based on the data that we're observing? So those sensors are becoming what people call the Internet of Things, and many of you are potentially working on that. So fields like finance or marketing or entertainment or energy, they're good examples of people who are actively pursuing the use of information to optimize their performance. And I'll distinguish myself. I'll be just talking about public health here. We can chat about other topics outside of this talk. And one of the interesting motivations is that we have a big planet, and we have information in multiple places. And I'd like to show you some examples from places where we collect a lot of epidemiological information. And maybe we can learn from those experiences to use them, in places where we may not have access to information. So let me get started with the US. In the US, we typically collect epidemiological information. And for those of you who are in public health or are medical doctors, you guys know that information is not perfect. So this is a social science, and the gold standards are not what they are in physical sciences. So the idea is to go from this cloud of information, of data, and translate that into something that would be useful for decision makers. And so one of the ways to do it is to translate all the information you just saw in the cloud into something that looks like, say, an epidemiological curve or the incidence of a certain disease. The idea being that, and I'll show you some slides in a little bit, that we have data streaming currently, and the goal is for us to see if that data can be translated into something that will inform us of, say, disease incidence that we would not have other ways to get access to. And let me show you this. This is what I mean. This is a video that was prepared by Andrew. And I will not tell you much about the content, except that the black line is what the Center for Disease Control is predicting is happening in the US, whereas the other curves have been obtained with other methods. And if you see, and I'll play it again, the other curves, we have access to them before. And so that's what I mean in terms of going from the cloud to useful information in public health. I'll talk about this video afterward. Another question that comes to mind is, can we identify where data came from, and then localize where things are happening in real time? And I'll address that question as well. But let me tell you a little bit about why, specifically in epidemiology, it takes so long to get information that goes from the public to, say, bodies of information that are confirmed or to some degree well established and people believe, like the World Health Organization. And so for a person to be diagnosed with a specific disease, there are multiple steps. And once that happens, say at the clinical level, then that information goes to the next level, and through a hierarchy of steps, eventually it gets probably to us 2 or 3 weeks after the fact. So if you think about some epidemic outbreak, we already lost time because we're just looking at 3 weeks back in time, right? And that's a reason why we'd like to leverage all the information from those same places and see if we can eventually produce something, something we call digital disease detection, okay? So let me give you first, let me talk about some of the big disappointments of big data. And you might have seen this in the news before. And then I'll build upon that. So Google Flu Trends, how many people have seen Google Flu Trends? How many people know what Google Flu Trends is for? Okay, that's good. So for those of you who do not know, Google Flu Trends is a sentinel that on real time tells you, it looks pretty awful. In real time, it gives you information about how many people are likely to be experiencing flu-like symptoms in the US, okay? And they do that using what you type when you go to Google, and then you search for certain terms, and they have observed certain correlations in time where if you type, for example, flu or fever, when there are lots of people doing it, then they can establish some relationship between how many people are searching what and what the incidence of flu is. So they worked on this some years ago, and they published a very interesting paper in Nature. So it got a lot of press, and everyone was really excited to see that using some sensor, if you want to call it, meaning, if you track who is searching for what, people were excited to see that that information, which was not designed to provide an estimate of how many people are sick, but you could use that information to predict how many people were sick. And so it made big news, New York Times, and everyone was really happy. Google will save the world. So that was great. However, it was launched in 2008, and the very first year it was launched, there was a huge disappointment because there was an off-season pandemic, the H1N1, you may remember it, and that was not picked up by Google Food Trends. So people said, well, this big data hype was all a disappointment. And that's why the face is right there. And so many people said, well, really what Google was doing is they designed a method to just predict winter. Not really useful, right? So, people were very sad, but then Google came out and said, look, guys, we can do much better. And they published another paper 2 years later suggesting a cure. And what they did is they removed certain terms that seemed to be good predictors for winter or fall, and they said, well, now we have the right ones. So everyone was excited. This paper was published in a journal that was not as visible as Nature, but people said, well, let's proceed and use this. Yeah, the colors of the plots are not that good, but so that was good, right? So if you look at, do I have a pointer? So in 2009, you see that it went bad, but they cured it, right? And then in the following years, it seemed to be good. So everyone said, okay, we're in business. And then once again, the unhappy face, right? Disappointment face. Huge discrepancy between what the CDC reported and what Google was predicting, okay? And Nature picked it up and said, well, now the article was not Google predicting flu, but when Google, failed to do so, right? And so it was big news, and people were really disappointed, which led to a lot of press that, big data is just flawed, right? Like, we shouldn't trust big data anymore. And so on. I think there's another one. Well, then the NSA, right? Horrible. And then some people asked me about Nate Silver. Anyway, so we could have thought we're doomed. That's it. Big data it was just a farce. But then let me talk to you about, and this is how I got into flu detection and digital disease detection. And so let's just look at the assumptions that Google had. So the assumptions were that if you look for fever or say chicken soup, cold, whatever, right, a set of terms, if you add up all the people that are searching for those terms, then you will find an independent variable that will be able to predict the incidence of flu, right? And so they mainly used a single variable approach. They chose, so if you cannot see, the vertical direction shows the correlation with the Center for Disease Control data. And the x-axis shows the number of terms that they used to create this single variable. And so as you can see, they used 45. That was the best approach. They didn't publish which search terms, claiming that if they did, people could hack the system and ruin their efforts, which is legitimate, right? And then the second assumption is that the relationship between these searches and the number of people falling sick was static. Then we thought, well, that led to several consequences, including poor predictions, but also that humans needed to check the system continuously and remove terms that were not appropriate. So we thought, okay, well, let's try to replicate. Let's do science, right? So we tried to do science, but we couldn't. So it's science, right? We build upon what others have done in the past, and we refine things, except that Google was not allowing us to get access to their data. So then we said, well, we're doomed again, right? So we were sad. And so, interestingly, the big question was Nature is publishing this work that's unscientific because it cannot be verified, right? Yet there was some bit of hope, not big hope, because Google built 2 websites where in the top one, Google Correlate, you can pass it a time series. That could be, say, the CDC data, Center for Disease Control, information about how many people are sick. And then it would tell you which terms are highly correlated with that signal, okay? And it would give you a time series for each of those terms. And in principle, you could replicate their study. And there's another service called Google Trends, which just tells you if you type a term, it tells you how many people are, or what proportion of searches are being done in a given day or a given week. So we couldn't replicate Google Flu Trends using their data. Yet we said, what if we proposed another method? And using that low-quality data, we could improve the performance of Google Flu Trends. What if we just get it close to what it is, right? Because we have low-quality data, but let's propose something. And then so we revised the three things that we felt were flawed. One was that we should take a multivariate approach, meaning that we should let each term have its own use at a given week. And the importance of such term in predicting the relevant variable would change dynamically. And we would do it automatically, because now we're in computer science here, right? So we can let the computer do everything. I mean, come on, right? Machine learning, right? Anyway, Google is doing that supposedly, right? But they were not. So this is what we proposed, which is basically just a way to expand, for those in machine learning, is just expand the training period as new CDC data becomes available, as new data from epidemiology becomes available, and just build a linear model with multiple variables and just dynamically calibrate it as more information becomes available. So we found these terms using Google Correlate. So these are the actual terms that we used. Yeah, you want Hannes? I can go back, but let me just deliver. So these were our predictions, and this is what Google had done. So we had low quality data, but presumably a better method, and we were capable of, outperforming the predictions of Google. And this plot was produced assuming we did not have access to the. So this is not a training set. This is an out of sample, if that makes sense to those who know machine learning. In other words, we're pretending we were back then, and we were predicting every week and 2 weeks ahead of time. So we were really excited, and we thought, well, let's check, because Google Flu Trends had been in the news in the outbreak of 2012, 2013, and so let's check what happens in this season. We were in January 2013, and turns out, Google Correlate does not have data for that. So we're like, okay, well, never mind, nice experiment. But we said, well, what if we use that even lower quality data and see what would happen with our method. And turns out this is our plot, and the one in green is our method with extremely low quality data, and the red is Google Flu Trends. So we were happy. We're like, okay, we didn't get access to the data, the original data, but our method works great. So, and I'm telling you this story slowly because for some students who are working in things, so you'll see that research is about bumping your head against the wall many times. So we were so excited that we sent our report to Nature, and we were like, okay, guys, And they're like, oh, well, it's not that relevant, really, Like, can you really deliver results in real time like Google does? We're like, well, no, we depend on getting access to their data. And they don't release their data frequently necessarily. So we couldn't. And that was the main criticism. So they said, well, it's cool, guys. Good job. So we're like, OK. Then in 2013, Google said, oh, we noticed we should have taken a multivariate approach. And this was months after we had submitted those things that were rejected, yet they were not getting very good results. So it was not only to take a multivariate approach. Then in March 2014, and we sent our paper to multiple places, then these guys who happen to be here in Harvard, and I don't know if one of them is here, but they published this paper where they were saying, well, look, there were errors in Google, and the methodology was not good. And they had like 4 main points. Basically, if you used autoregressive models or lagged CDC data, meaning if you predict the flu today based on what happened last week, that's even better than Google Flu Trends. Embarrassing, right? So that's not good. And then they created other methods, and they introduced this idea that we had introduced before too, of recalibrating in their own methods the importance of Google Flu Trends in predicting the flu. So it turns out that this paper showed up in Science, right? So, we're like, well, anyway, we were frustrated. So this has been a long story, right? So now I want to make it short and then jump to other topics, but this was just like for students mainly. So eventually it got published, our paper, and we were quite happy. And it did receive a lot of press. And so we felt, okay, it paid off, right? It paid off, and it became the most read paper in this journal, and the first one being one written in 1998. So, and this is for those of you who are in medicine, I don't know if anyone is in medicine, but this is a very good journal in medicine. So we were happy, and our figure looked a little bit like that, basically because they requested us to not use 2 different inputs, so not use Google Correlate and Google Trends data, but just use a single source. And so that ruined a little bit our 2012 result here. We were still a little off, but we were happy about it. And so we said, okay. And then we did publish which terms we used. And this plot shows you, and unfortunately you cannot read the terms on this screen, but it tells you for each term at each week how much that term contributed to the prediction. And as you see, the contribution of each term changes in time, which is natural, right? People read the news, they read there's an outbreak of flu, so everyone's searching, right? So you need to adjust, right? So, just to note that in this time period where things went wrong, the method adjusts itself as any machine learning approach should do, right? So we were very happy. Our results were better than Google Flu Trends. I'm going to start going faster because I just realized I've gone too slow. Hopefully, I'm not boring you horribly. So that was the press that the paper got. So, great. So, and I'll tell you a little bit more of that. Also, long story short, and I'll show you three other ways in which you can use big data to predict flu specifically. But Google actually contacted us, and they said, OK, we want you to work with us. So now we're working with them. They're going to share their data. And no, of course not. I mean, that's a rule. Like academics, you just throw them something, and if they can publish, they should be happy, right? So that's our role right now. So they're not paying us, but they will get the benefit of getting a better website for their digital disease detection. So we asked the following question. So we're looking at the patterns of searches of people. What if you just look at what medical doctors are doing? And so there are some portions of the presentation that I wouldn't like you to take pictures of. This is fine, but there are some that have not been published. So it turns out that when you go to a doctor, and the doctor doesn't know what's wrong with you, they go back into another room, or probably in front of you. They go into the computer and they search. But they don't search on Google. They search on other databases. This is one, up to date. And the benefit of doing it there is that any information that you see in that website, it will be information that has been verified by another medical doctor. So you're not getting spam, okay? You're really getting the facts. And so we said, well, what if we could get access to what medical doctors are searching? Would that improve things? And this is just to validate that, lots of people are using it. And for this, once we were out there in the press, I submitted this paper, and in 2 weeks it was accepted. And they said, we really want to publish your paper. Like, oh, okay. So, that's the subjectivity of science, which is objective, right? Or the social systems, right, in which it is emerged. So this is the performance of our method. Now, we just got limited data from up to date. And it turns out that the performance of this data set is a lot better than Google's data. Unfortunately, up to date will not release data in real time to us. They may do it themselves. Now they have the method because we published the paper, so it's out there. That'd be great, right? If they do it. And so these are the terms. So doctors are not searching for random terms, right? They search for very specific, potentially very technical terms. And so those are the terms that are contributing the most to the predictions. Tamiflu, for those of you who know, Tamiflu is a what would you call it? It's not a vaccine. It's a medicine that helps you recover faster from the flu. So, and then we asked, well, what if we could get access to what actually people are saying about flu? If you ask them, right? Google was not designed to be a flu monitoring system, neither up to date. We said, well, what if are there systems that are geared specifically to do that? And this is work with Andrew, who's sitting here. And so Flu Near You is an app, right? So it's cool. You download it in your phone, and you say, I'm sick or I'm not sick, right? Of course, people who are using it are mostly healthcare providers, which is funny. So many of you probably have never heard of it and will not hear about it unless you're interested and you're a responsible citizen. And you want to... Anyway, there's some incentives to participating. It tells you the closest place where you can find a vaccine if you want, and so on. But typically, it recovers information from users that hopefully will return weekly reports. And from those reports, then you can calculate how many of those reports show that they have symptoms, flu-like symptoms like the CDC data, and then calculate the ratio between those reports and the total, and that should give you a percentage of how many people are sick, right? Now, in terms of statistics, we're sampling a different population, right? The CDC, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more. The CDC tells you how many people are sick right now based on the number of people who show up in medical doctors' offices and show flu symptoms. So it's a very specific way to infer the percentage of the population sick. If it is correlated to the number of people who are going to the hospital that are sick, right? So, and this is just, we're sampling a very specific set of the population who are interested or responsible. So you wouldn't necessarily think that they would correspond at all. This is the distribution of people who are submitting reports weekly. And so if you calculate the ratio and then make it a percentage of the number of reports of people who are sick divided by the total number, you get that green line. So it has also these spikes that appear in Google Flu Trends. And so we thought, oh, well, this is not as good either. But it turns out that if you use, in an ideal world, we'd have, for those of you who do ordinary differential equations, so Avi, I'm not disappointing you. There's an ordinary differential equation, a system of, right? And it looks horrible, unfortunately. My screen looks great. But for those of you who have seen this model before, this tells you how many people are getting infected or the rate of change of people infected. And from there, you can calculate the R0, which is sometimes what you hear in the news or in the movie Contagion, if you ever watched it. And so if it's bigger than 1, then it means that there will be an epidemic. If it's less than 1, then it will not. There will not be an epidemic. And so typically, R0 tells you something related to the derivative of the signal. And now I'm using some math so that people who are in math feel like, okay, this guy's talking about calculus, right? The derivative, the rate of change. And so it limits the rate of change depending on certain parameters that have to do with the total population, have to do with the rate at which people recover from the disease, and how frequently people are interacting. So there are bounds for that, right? So ideally, we could just look at Google Flu Trends, for example, or that data set that I presented to you before, and see if that signal, which is being produced by an alternative method, if that follows this public health or this derivative bound. Unfortunately, those equations are beautiful, but they're not describing necessarily well what's happening in real time right now. So if we really wanted to do this, to bound the changes, what we instead did is we looked at the signal of how many people are getting sick in the past 11 years from the Centers for Disease Control, and we estimated those changes as a function of what has happened in the previous weeks. And we got that histogram on top, and then this histogram was computed with the Flu Near You data, this participatory surveillance system to detect how many people are sick. And we realized that there are many outliers here, or to some degree, if you will, the signal has the same shape or the same changes as the CDC, only in a very specific region. And so if we create what people call in signal processing a spike detector that removes those outliers that are not consistent with the derivative changing as it should due to our hypothesis in the model or in the observed data, then this is what we get. The blue line, can you see the blue line? So this still looks better than Google Flu Trends, so we were excited, right? So we had already three methods, right? So we had an alternative for Google Flu Trends, we had the database from doctors, and we had this participatory surveillance effort, so we were happy. And now this video, you'll understand better. So this is the information that we would be producing with Flu Near You, the blue and the green, and the black is what we want to predict, which you can see it follows quite well our predictions, and red is Google Flu Trends just for comparison. And we were not trying to bully Google Flu Trends anymore, so I'll stop bullying it. Let me just skip this. And so the bottom line is all efforts paid off eventually. So now Google has contacted us, as I said, and we now have alternatives to Google Flu Trends. And so let me see if I can. So this is a website that I'll try to access. So this is in beta format, and in fact, we finished it this morning. So forgive. Let's see. Oh, right here. So before I display this, so this is displaying all the data sources that we have as of now. One of them is Google Flu Trends, but the other two is Flu Near You. This is the data from the Centers for Disease Control, and this is the alternative method that I told you about. And what we're displaying there is how many people we're estimating will get sick. And if you hover over with the mouse, it tells you the estimates of each different data source. And if you zoom in, which this is an experiment, then what you get is even a forecast of what may happen next week based on our methods. And so this is the punchline of the flu part. Okay, so it paid off. It was frustrating at the beginning. We felt nobody cared about our methodological improvements, but at the end of the day, people cared. So, so we're happy. So let me tell you a little bit more when that wakes up. So, are there any questions here? No. Yes.
So you briefly mentioned your the spike algorithm to remove spike, but how confident are you that whatever you filter may be a true breakout? I mean, that's perhaps the most interesting prediction.
Yes. So it is likely that we will do that, provided. So the one thing that we know is in the past 11 years, we've seen some outbreaks that have been bad, right? So we will not filter those. So if there's a horrible outbreak that has not been observed over the past 11 years, we'll miss it. Yes. Although we won't miss it that bad because we're giving a really big window. But yes, so our confidence is the confidence that any climate model would tell you, right? From what we have observed, we can tell that that's what most likely will happen. But if the CO2 really increases to 4 times, we don't know because we don't have data for that. So it's an out-of-sample question. And so all your models could break down, right? So it's that level of confidence. Pavlos.
Are we sure that the ground truth is CDC? Or is it Google? Maybe Google is finding the exact trend and CDC is wrong.
Yes.
Do you have any other evidence?
So there's a, let me answer the first question.
Yes.
So the ground truth is not the truth. And this is well known amongst clinicians. And so that's why we're making efforts to not tune everything to replicate that. Right? This is something we've seen in climate science, right? If you have a model that does not reproduce the doubling of CO2, then it will not be accepted by the IPCC, right? The panel for intergovernmental climate change, blah, blah, blah. So they will say, oh, well, your model is not good, but then you're forcing all the models to be the same. So it's kind of, right? So your question is well taken in the sense that if you force or if you train or calibrate your models to reproduce CDC, they will reproduce CDC, but is that what people are experiencing? So there are many efforts.
Actually, my question is different because in the climate case, you have sensors and you measure the CO, right? Here, how does CDC measure the actual number of flus? They must have some ways of measuring the actual number of incidents, right?
Yeah, so
that may have an error itself, right?
Yeah, so I would just address the first. The example of climate is the same. It has the same quality because you do have sensors, but we have not gotten into a regime where the CO2 is so high, so we don't know, right? So if you force the models to replicate things that we have observed, that's what they will do. And so in the same way, now, so your question in terms of, is Google really getting, like maybe it estimated right, the number of people who got sick. So there are other methods that people are looking for, including this Flu Near You method, that are geared towards sampling other sectors of the population and trying to see whether the ground truth has not been extracted, and most of them match more the CDC than the Google Flu Trends. Yes.
Is the CDC data basically empirical?
It's clinical, so people fill out a form when they see a patient. This patient showed up for a specific disease, and they have flu-like symptoms, so they check that. And they just count the number of people who have done it across hospitals. And
they themselves, the number that we're looking at is not the result of them further massaging that.
Yes, no massaging. Yes, it's just reporting raw information. Yes. Yes. Okay. So I promised I would tell you a little bit more of other data sources. And so Twitter, as many of you use, I have a Twitter account, by the way, but you waste your time if you follow me because I never post anything. I just have it to get access to Twitter, but I'm not. I guess I'm from the next generation or the old previous is the right way. I wanted to sound younger, Pablos, but you didn't help. So the goal was, well, can we use alternative methods? And this is addressing, right, the efforts that you're bringing up, Pablos. So for those of you in natural language processing, and then also my figure looks horrible, but so the goal was, can we use Twitter or what people are tweeting as a good way to identify whether there are people with flu-like symptoms? And the answer is yes. And also the answer is that we need to improve our methods, okay? So this is even like, so Google Flu Trends failed. This is likely to fail as well. And in fact, it failed last season. But I'll show you this anyway. And my thought, so I started participating in this project just 3 months ago when they couldn't figure out some technical aspects. So I didn't design the project or the methods. I just helped them fix it. And the goal is, so you see tweets, right? And so Twitter has an API, which I don't remember what it stands for, but it's just some way for you to access their data. API, maybe somebody in the audience knows? What about that?
Application programming.
Application programming interface, which means that there's a way in which you can query things in Twitter, and it will give you back information from their system, right? So they have an API which lets you see typically just 1% of the 100% of tweets. And they gave us access to geocoded, meaning we knew exactly where people were tweeting from. And so the analysis involved some natural language processing that said, so if, and let me probably, so can you read any of that, or the quality is horrible? So if you see, say, in irrelevant, the second, the flu shot prevents hangovers. Anyway, I'm not going to read, it's kind of embarrassing, and I didn't write it. But you can see that that's irrelevant, right? The second one is also irrelevant, right? Like you don't expect that to have anything to do with people getting sick, right? And I'll leave it there for 20 more seconds. But you see the third one is something that is relevant, right? So by the way, if you look at tweets, it's, you see all sorts of things, and language there is interesting, to say it in a nice way, and lots of misspellings, so that adds complications too, right? Long story short, not very long, but short, and my remote is not working. So we could predict, to some degree, the daily. This is daily, and this is what people were complaining, well, you're delivering flu estimates at the national level, but how does that help me here, right? Does that make sense? So people were saying, well, what if I live in Boston and I want to know how many people are sick? So this was the aim of this study. And so we needed more granular information, and CDC delivers information locally, but they're not as, it's not as precise in terms of percentages. At the local level, they say, well, there's high incidence of disease, and whatever that. So you cannot even train your models at the local level. And this part, I did not participate in this part of the analysis, but this is just to display the fact that you can do some spatial analysis for those of you who know what I'm talking about, meaning where things are starting, where there's a red spot that you might want to avoid, or I don't know if that's the case. By the way, nobody has brought up the fact that so when you're predicting things, you see there's a feedback cycle, because if you predict there's going to be a huge spike, then people are going to react. So when you're evaluating whether your system is good based on forecasted information, it's kind of tricky if you see that, right? If you predict something big and then everyone decides to just shut themselves in their homes, you're going to get that estimate wrong, right? But it's not because it was wrong. It's just showing the tendency that it would happen if things kept going the same way. So, because some people tell me, well, your forecast is off. Well, yes, but when it interacts, well, their claim is that your forecast may be wrong. And the argument is yes, because if you display it to people like in the financial markets, right? If you predict this asset's going to go up, everyone buys it, and it does go up, right? But then until a certain point where people realize that it has or doesn't have any value, right? So that was just to show that at the granular level or city level, one can have proxies of people showing up in the emergency room or in doctor's visits. And now I'm going to move towards a more ordinary differential equation modeling of diseases that also use a lot of data. How am I doing in time, Pavlos? 5 minutes? Good. So and this is work with Clifton and some other student who's gone. Clifton is here. And so as you may imagine, so there are some diseases that depend heavily on climate because the vector or the little entity that transmits the disease from one person to another, like in dengue or in cholera, they live in certain environments that if the temperature is too high or too low, they may not thrive. And so there are a lot of open questions regarding if the climate is changing because we're forcing it to with more CO2, what's going to be the burden of disease, and can you predict that? So there's a lot of interest in learning that. And so establishing relationships between environmental factors and diseases is quite important. And this plot looks horrible. Clifton can see it in his screen much better. But maybe I should focus on this one. If you look at the cumulative number of people who are getting sick in black, you see that this blue curve is a cumulative rain in a given region. Then you'll see that in some locations it rains a lot, and then people start getting sick, right? And because the transmission, say specifically for cholera, where people are contaminating the water that others are ingesting, that cycle is important in understanding the dynamics. And so we have, so our hypothesis is that we have, rain events that may depend well on the temperature of the planet. So I used to work in climate science, and that's why I bring up this climate science stuff. So I don't know how many of you know, but in the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change report, if you increase the CO2, definitely there's more humidity in the air, and so more clouds are expected to show up. The question is, if very high clouds show up in the future, then they will warm more. There will be a positive feedback in terms of warming the planet. But if the clouds are low, then they may cool the planet and they may balance out. Does that make sense? So all these efforts to understand disease transmission have similar patterns because, for example, mosquitoes in dengue, they cannot thrive in temperatures higher than, say, 34 degrees Celsius, right? So if you say all of a sudden predict, well, temperatures will increase crazily, yes, but if it crosses that threshold, then the mosquitoes transmitting dengue will not survive, so dengue will disappear, right? So it's not always like a bad news scenario. I'm not suggesting that we should keep warming things, but anyway.
Don't people not like 34 degrees?
I like 34 degrees. I'm fine. Do you not like it?
Seems a little hot.
But you said a little hot, so you don't really hate it. I'm just interpreting. So sorry if I misinterpreted you. So anyway, to bring back the conversation to big data and computations, so in order for us to start learning where things came from and how frequently they go from one place to another, we can use mobile phone information in locations where we don't have, say, mobility rates or these matrices of origin and destination that we so frequently have in the US or in Europe. So you can use this mobile phone information as proxies to say, well, a lot of people go from this city to another city, because we know, right? And privacy doesn't matter, right, as you know. It was meant to be a joke, but a lag joke. And so for the weather, we use climate models that are typically assimilating information that, and that's in fact where we got the idea to recalibrate Google Food Trends, or the methods behind, because in weather information, we know that if we do not reinitialize the model with observations, we just get it wrong really badly, right? And you know when you check your weather forecast for the 5-day, it's always not good, and precipitation 2 days, not very good. So we need to reinitialize them, which is similar to what we did for this Google Food Trends paper. And so we need to get climate data precisely. And these methods actually, these models are assimilating data. So it's the best proxy we have for climate in any given region of the world, regardless of the existence of sensors in any location, right? So because we have global data. And so, the goal of this project, which is ongoing, and Clifton is going to give me an update on that, which I hope is going to be promising, is that we can use models, so the applied math and the big data approach, to simulate the dynamics of any region, even if there are no, even if the epidemiological information is not being collected as it is in Europe or in the US, right? And so this is just to give you a sense of, what we're looking at. This is Mozambique, and I'm going to go fast just to meet the 5-minute deadline that I may be close to. So this is just an interesting example of the kinds of things that you can find if you estimate the diameter of the spread of the disease in a location like Mozambique. We have found that it moves as a power law of a gravity constant, where a gravity constant is defined the same way as in physics it would be done by the product of the charges or the masses, if it was a gravity, right? The mass divided by the distance squared. So this kind of relationship can tell you to what degree the interaction across cities is it strong, and if it is, and because they're close, this will grow, right? If this is small, it will grow. If there's a lot of population in one of them or the other, that product will change. And so we have found power law relationships telling us how fast the disease will grow based on the connectivity of these locations. And this is ongoing work. And let me see. And then I'm gonna wrap up with this, which is in locations where you actually just don't have epidemiological data. What do you do? And so some of the projects that I'm involved in, and this is part of the team where I'm working now with in the medical school. The goal is to crawl the web, right, and then find newspapers, reports, whatever, and then just plot them wherever they appear. And I don't know if you can tell that that's supposed to be Africa. You definitely cannot see, right? So this is supposed to be Africa and the most recent outbreak of Ebola. So this is Nigeria, somewhere here. And this is Liberia, where it started, I think. And so the goal was there to map how frequently people were reporting in the local newspapers in multiple languages, and see if we could track it just based on those reports. And it turns out that the estimates are fairly good. And this is in places where, the estimates come lag weeks and weeks after the fact. And so I need to wrap up. And I went too fast now. Anyway, thank you.
have time for two questions.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. So I've got two questions or comments. First of all, you've got a map on your title slide. I see a lot of maps in there, and you just mentioned the spatial aspect of once, right? I think this is the important one in this case, right?
Very important.
You're doing signal analysis, but there are different approaches to this kind of signal analysis. So what you're doing mostly is to analyze the time domain, right? So when does the spike occur?
What I showed, yes.
Okay, so perhaps there is something behind which I didn't see. But,
Yeah,
so basically you predict when a spike will occur.
Yes.
But you don't predict yet when it occurs, yet you put all the data on a map, right?
There are many separate efforts. So this is not a single study, right? So there are different locations, different spatial scales. And so I showed you some sort of a mixture of them, but they're following the same motivation, which is to provide useful information, but they're not the same project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to mention and point out there is actually a Center for Geographical Analysis.
Yes.
Who does exactly that, right? Spatial analysis plus spatial temporal analysis, so this could help. And the second comment was about the NLP background. So just what I saw again, like from a very superficial viewpoint, of course, in this presentation, was that you were looking for certain terms like flu, influenza, seems like named entity recognition or something like this.
Yes.
So, of course, and you probably didn't know this, I just wanted to point it out that there are way more intelligent, like self-learning, self-calibrating, and semi-supervised methods, right? So
we have developed many of those. I just wanted to show this first effort, but definitely now the efforts are, of course, to automatize everything and to use machine learning approaches and exactly do what you're saying. We're doing that. Yeah.
Perfect. So perhaps we should talk then a bit more in detail because like the two aspects which I mentioned, we're just combining them. So we're trying to extract emotions, which is a bit different.
Right.
But we're trying to apply this in the malaria and dengue use case as well now.
Awesome.
So to extract meaning from unstructured text data, in this case mostly Twitter, and combine this with the geosemantic information extraction algorithm. So this could be something which could be interesting to you as well.
We should talk.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions?